Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Welcome to ACM and welcome to the first talk in our brand new ACM Conversations series of monthly talks. This series would bring leading scholars, cultural practitioners, artisans, and community resource persons in Singapore and from abroad in conversation with curators and educators at ACM. This talk series would not have been possible without the generous sponsorship of Royal Insignia, a premier luxury brand for medals, jewelry, and fine gifts for members of the world's royal families and international ministries. This evening, Director of ACM and Peranakan Museum, Kennie Ting, will be speaking on how both museums have adapted to new ways of being in the post-pandemic world, as well as their direction and plans for the future. There will be a Q&A after this talk, so do save your questions for the end. Without further ado, I will invite Kennie to start the talk today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Melissa. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. As the title of the series suggests, it's called ACM Conversations. So there's also a certain suggestion that we're here to have a conversation. And today's session, I hope, sets the tone where it's meant to be slightly intimate. I will share a little bit about the behind-the-scenes kinds of opportunities and kind of challenges that we've gone through as well in the last few years. And, also articulate a little bit about what we're doing in the 2 years ahead. So I always like to start by giving thanks always. So I want to give thanks to the amazing ACM team who have just been, at the top of their game, despite the challenges that we faced in the last year. And you see the work that the ACM team does from top to bottom in all the exhibitions and the publications that we do here. So thank you so much to this team that I have the privilege of working with. I'd like to also thank our patrons and donors and board members, including Royal Insignia, who have very generously supported this series of talks and allowed us to actually restart these live sort of lectures again in the post-pandemic world. We couldn't do anything that we do without our patrons and donors. I also like to thank our very, very professional, very passionate, and very dedicated volunteers and docents. They are the front line and the face of the museum. And you have kept us going. You are the soul, in some ways, of all the work that we do. So thank you so very much. So you might know that the ACM and Peranakan Museum have gone through 10 years of renovations and gallery refreshes. That's a whole decade. Somebody could grow up in that time. And what happened was we renovated ACM for 7 years, and then the pandemic hit. And then we continued by renovating Peranakan Museum for 3.5 years. But in that time, we actually underwent a very major transition in terms of our mission, our collecting and curatorial strategies, and so on. Just before ACM reopened, ACM finished its renovations in 2020, the ACM board and ourselves, we had a complete sort of like rebranding exercise. And it was all meant to be like launched, etc. in 2020 when we finished the museum, but of course, you know what happened then. So there was no chance to do this sort of like launch of our rebranding. So this is a bit of a recap for anyone who hasn't heard of this. But this is not a formal name, but we are Singapore's National Museum of Asian Antiquities and Decorative Art. So again, at the time, we were trying to clarify between the big four national museums who does what. So we know what National Museum does, the National Gallery and SAM. So for us, we clarified that our role was really in the space of antiquities, decorative art, and by extension into contemporary design. So we would not be in the space of contemporary art, because it used to be that I used to be approached many times by gallerists who dealt or worked in the space of a contemporary Chinese or Indian artist, and that's really not our area, except when we sort of do the occasional commission. And then, we decided that, at our essence, what ACM does is it sort of represents and explores Asian art, history, culture, heritage, design, etc., through the lens of Singapore, quote unquote. What this means is that we're very interested in two key themes in everything that we do. So this is a kind of guiding principle for us. So we always look at finding ways to express our port city heritage. Singapore is a port city. We're cross-cultural, we're in a way pan-Asian, and our essence is a mix of East and East and East and West. So there's always this essence of the port city heritage in everything that we do. And secondly, also very Singapore, you know, we're interested in innovation in the space of tradition because we believe like strongly in heritage, cultural heritage, but preservation isn't enough. We need to find ways in which our heritage can actually be reinvented, innovated on such that it remains relevant for the future, not just for today. So innovation in tradition is also very important. And because we spotlight innovation in tradition, therefore, we're able to sort of bring people into the picture. Working with artisans and designers, craftsmen and craftswomen, etc. Everything in the museum's galleries, although historic, was made by somebody. Unfortunately, we don't know who they are. They're anonymous. But when we move into the space of the contemporary, we're thus able to celebrate the makers of these amazing objects, and also celebrate the Asian imagination and creativity historically and today. We have four main sorry, it's a very wordy slide, but I'll get past this very quickly. We have four main curatorial themes that are an extension of our two guiding principles: maritime trade, faith and belief, materials and design, and Peranakan. So again, you see this permeating everything that we do. And it's very simply structured here. So, you know, in ACM, you would know first floor, maritime trade, second floor, faith and belief, third floor, materials and design. Of course, Peranakan is very lucky, it gets its own museum. And by way of our four main themes, you know, this also sort of, in some ways, delineates the universe of communities that we work closely with. We're a national museum, so we know what our role is, and we work with various different communities, like the diplomatic community. We work with communities of culture, ethnicity, and faith. We work with the industry and communities of creative practice, so designers, artisans, etc. We work with academia very strongly, of course, the universities, academics, historians here and abroad. We work with education. Everyone in primary 6 has to go through the ACM today. And of course, we believe very strongly in access, so ensuring that we have programs also for communities with special needs. And then this is our brand promise: beauty, wonder, and relevance. And I want to break these down for you. What do they mean? By beauty, you know, I said this already, that we believe very strongly in championing the Asian creativity, the Asian imagination, because we think that it's kind of been forgotten. You know, the fact that for centuries, actually, in Asia, you know, we had these sort of amazing artisans, long, sophisticated, excellent traditions of craftsmanship and artisanal, you know, work. That still happens today. And it's important to try to raise these narratives up and remind the world that there's so much talent and creativity in Asia and in Singapore. So wonder, this refers to our technical excellence. If you go through our exhibitions, you know, you may know that I am extremely particular about aspects of exhibition design, of lighting, of display, etc. And we strive very hard to make sure that in terms of the technical aspects of the exhibitions and the work that we do, we want to be the best. And of course, then there's relevance, which pertains to curatorial excellence. We want what we do to always reflect the issues of the contemporary day. It has to be relevant to, you know, whether it's to the community or to sort of geopolitics, perhaps. And so you see that also in the work that we do. And this would remain for the years ahead. Something that's very important to us, but with COVID happening, actually, in some ways it helped us to focus our efforts, is that I've always believed that it's very important that the museum not just be a space of objects, but also a home for people. So if you see, for every exhibition we've done since 2019, there was a very concerted effort for us to sort of engage and involve people and communities in the very core work that we do of making exhibitions. So it's not just for programs, but for exhibitions. I will highlight 3 case studies, or 3 instances. Case studies, so serious, so academic. The first was this show. This is my favorite exhibition of all time. It was called Faith, Beauty, Love, Hope. And it was a show we did during the pandemic. It came out of, you know, we did this because shows had to be canceled, and the team put this on. And this show was very special to me because it sort of blended what I describe as significance with meaning. You know, there was cultural, historical, art historical significance of the objects, but we sort of put this together with personal, spiritual meaning. Because the goal of the show was actually to provide solace in the midst of the pandemic. And what we did was we had various the entire community of the museum, so not just the curators, but our staff working exhibitions, estates, the security guards, our colleagues at the restaurants, we had our donors and patrons pick pieces across the museum. And the pieces were then displayed. And we asked them, why did you pick these pieces? Why do these resonate with you? And if you came to the exhibition, you'll see that we had, of course, the historical information, but we also had these kind of personal reflections of why this particular piece was important to them at a personal level during this time of crisis. And I think this really represents, again, the power of a museum to blend, history, art history, faith and spirituality, and personal meaning. So that's been very important. What's more important is that it also sort of sparked off collaborations with the community. First is with the Mandarin guides on this first series of Chinese language publications, sort of like 100 treasures of ACM that were written by our wonderful, wonderful Mandarin guides. The themes, the objects were selected by them, and then we worked together with the guides to publish this. We're so proud of this series. Another collaboration was very special was between us and the Interreligious Organization. This is the organization of the 10 big faiths, communities of faith in Singapore. And there's something very radical about having our religious elders coming and picking objects in the exhibition or in the museum and sharing their own personal sort of like stories about why these objects were important to them, and having these be like on Instagram and like Facebook. So there's something very radical about that, I think. And that was very meaningful because it's kept going. So we've continued since then to actually partner with the communities of faith for entire second floor, which is on faith and belief. So you'll see that, for all the religious festivals, we work with the IRO to select the objects in the museum and also sort of celebrate, everything, all the major, not just the ones that we have public holidays for, but even like Nowruz, etc. You'll see also on the second floor that our corridor, I think every year we'll try to have a changing installation where we work with the communities of faith to reflect the contemporary aspects of heritage. And we've also been working with the specific communities to build up, to fill in the gaps in our collection. So we've been working with the rabbi and the Waterloo Street Synagogue to build up a showcase of Judaica, and also with the Sikh community and the Central Sikh Gurudwara to build up a showcase of Sikh art. We're missing the Parsi Zoroastrian, I'm working on it, and the Taoist, working on it, I promise, and the Baha'i, working on it. And of course, this all culminated in this amazing exhibition curated by my colleague Noura, Body and Spirit, where again we worked with the communities of faith. We brought objects out from our collection. We loaned pieces from like the mosque, the church. We had the kavadis that were actually used during Thaipusam, and we brought them in here on and we explored a topic that was very relevant to the time. It was about the human body and the cosmos, health, wellness. And these questions of spirituality. And this just ended in March this year. I mean, even if you look at the barong here, we even sought advice from the Balinese community here as to like how best do you place and display the objects. This was actually our first real interfaith special exhibition, and we made it a point to really consult and seek advice from the communities here as to how best they ought to be displayed and placed. Second case study is, of course, with the communities of design and creative practice. I'm very pleased because we've been, in the last few years, working with what we believe are the most important or the top sort of Asian craftsmen and craftswomen, designers and artisans in their fields. We believe it's important to work in that arena because, like I said, we feel it's important to champion these narratives of Asian craftsmanship and how, like the best of Asian creativity and imagination and minds are actually shaping the world. We've actually had sort of, it's very strange, but we've actually had 4 installments of this. And I'm very pleased, actually, I'll talk a bit about that later, but I'm very pleased that we have Tarun Dahiliani actually in the audience right here. I'm sorry, I'm so excited that you're here. But anyway, I'll talk a bit more about that show later on. But yeah, we felt it was very important for us to engage and present who is actually sort of making a difference in their own cultures as well as globally in the space of design, with fashion being a starting point because it was easier. But it was also important to us not to forget our local community. It's always very important. So we started on 2 different projects and in the midst of the pandemic. The first was a collaboration with the Singapore Fashion Council. It's our industry association for fashion, where we're partnering an annual fashion design competition, and we open up our vaults. I don't open our vaults to anyone, usually VIPs, but I felt that it was important to open our vaults to our designers. And because these are, our creative minds in Singapore. It's important to open this up to them. And the idea is that the finalists of the annual competition will then create new capsule collections based on the ACM's collection and on Singapore's heritage. And the winner of the competition we would then sort of take into the museum's collection and display the next year in another collaboration, which is with LaSalle College of the Arts, a school of fashion. For the last 3 years now, we've had an MOU with LaSalle to curate this exhibition called #SGFashionNow. It's co-curated by the students of the LaSalle College of the Arts' fashion school who take a fashion curatorial module. So they're not student fashion designers. They are specializing in curatorship for fashion. And each year, the students themselves would pick the designers to be featured. They would propose the curatorial narrative. They would suggest the exhibition design, and I would find the money to put this on. So the last 2 years, we've had a small scale, sort of 10 to 16 Singaporean designers featured in our contemporary gallery. And then out of the blue, very suddenly, we were very pleased and very surprised. The Koreans came and they liked it. So this year's 2023 SG Fashion Now exhibition just opened in Busan in South Korea. It is a combination of 2021 and 2022's shows, plus a few more designers. So there's 27 Singaporean designers featured. It'll be 3 months in Busan and 3 months in Seoul from November. And if you see the exhibition with 27 designers, 2 things come to mind. How the works displayed actually reflect this idea of Singapore as a cosmopolitan, cross-cultural port city. We blend East and West, old and new, tradition and innovation, craft and technology, and we're constantly evolving. So this fashion is constantly evolving, just as Singapore itself is constantly reinventing itself for the future. I'm so excited about this because it means something that contemporary Singaporean fashion designers are being featured in South Korea. Not because I asked them to, they wanted it, which is often seen as at the forefront of popular culture. And we have we have very established designers featured like Benny Ong and Andrew Gan, but also emerging designers that you may have never heard before, like Youths in Balaclava, a group of, I think it's six young men, right, Dominic? 6 young men? 7 young men. They were most recently notorious for having their fashion show at Paris Fashion Week shut down by the police because it was staged as a conceptual bank heist. So, who knew, right? Singaporeans. Peranakan Museum, my 3rd case study, of course, it just reopened in February. An approach there was also very, very different. In academia, you would call it a micro-histories approach, which is to look at sort of, the objects that would have come from individuals, families, specific communities, and you tell those stories. And in the telling of those stories, you tell the bigger picture, history and material culture of this particular community. It's also very different because it's a lot more inclusive. We've included also other Peranakan communities other than the Babandunya. So we have the Tionghoa communities in Indonesia. We have the Cheti Malacca. We have the sort of Jawi Peranakan, the Arab Peranakans, and also, you know, a little bit of the sort of the Eurasians in that. The approach was also multidisciplinary. That was quite deliberate. So of course we have objects. We have objects from the history and culture of the Peranakan community. But we also have works of art. So we also have this sort of art historical approach where we look at the aesthetics of Peranakan culture and where that comes from. We have community voices. We've made it a point to actually document a lot of the the practices, say the Peranakan food and cuisine, making sarung kebaya and the kasubanik and all that. So we tried to document all of that and include all of these as multimedia in the galleries. And of course, very importantly, we also have included contemporary expressions. So contemporary works of art, fashion, design, craft, etc. are very cleverly secreted into each and every one of the galleries, so you can try to spot them. So we don't make it very easy for you. And in that way, again, you see how the museum is not just a space of objects, but a home full of people and voices and the stories and the sort of like in Chinese the 悲欢离合, like the sort of the lives and the emotions of the people of this community. So this is what has happened basically in the last 3 years. We've made in the last 6 or 7 years at least, we've made a very dramatic shifts from what the museum was before to now. We moved, this was during my predecessor's time actually, from a geographical approach, I mean all of you know this already, from looking at Asia by way of geography to a sort of cross-cultural approach, looking at themes that cut across nations, cultures, regions, and are sort of, they bring together or they unify. We've moved from ethnography, which is a very sort of colonial approach, to a spotlight or focus on sort of art, artisans, and the makers. We haven't moved. So we've sort of added on a contemporary aspect to the historic, which sort of expands the timeline. Because, I mean, who says his civilizations is historical? We are still civilization today. I mean, the civilizations still exist today. And then, we've also sort of like expanded our scope from objects to also making sure that communities actually have a sort of a presence, there's a very strong and palpable presence of communities in the museum. And we've moved from the museum being a sort of like a walled fortress to the sort of the collaboration approach, ACM X this and ACM X that. In this way, we're actually kind of following the fashion industry. It's all about collaborations. And this is the way to go. I mean, because I feel, again, we have the knowledge and academic wisdom and the objects, etc. There is also so much wisdom and experience in the community. And then, of course, we've moved from very classical types of exhibitions to more experimental showcases. This is whether it's the SG Fashion Now, which is totally experimental, to all of our special exhibitions. We're always taking a risk with the exhibitions that we do. And finally, from a space of knowledge, I feel we've moved to a space where we also want to create opportunity for the communities, really to profile their communities and their culture, opportunity for students, for sort of the younger talent, for the designers themselves and the artisans, etc., to grow their talent, and in some cases even to get good jobs, right? So all the students who have gone through the SG Fashion Now process, I mean the first round of students, we had 5 young women. And before the SG Fashion Now exhibition even opened, they were already hired by Dior and Ogilvy and Mather and a few other very important companies. So I mean, I feel that this is a very real way in which the museum can impact lives. Okay, so some of the challenges, it wasn't all good news, of course, is that we've been renovating for years and years, for a very long time. I got a lot of complaints all the time about what's happening at the museum because, we couldn't renovate the museum at once. I have to raise money, so we had to do it gallery by gallery in the course of years and years. And it was very, very confusing for the visitor. We were challenging very long-standing perceptions of what a museum such as ours, like the British Museum, oh my gosh, what's going on there right now, right? We're really sort of like making people rethink the idea of that sort of ethnographic museum and what it can actually do. And also, to be frank, there was a major shift in terms of the focus of funding, whether public or private. The government funding was very much, we went from the sort of MICA to MCC, where MCCY is a community ministry. And so a lot of the focus on funding was towards Singapore and building the community here. And so it was clear that we weren't going to get funding if it was just a general blockbuster exhibition from somewhere else. It had to be of some use, of some relevance to Singapore. This is true also of private funding. We have to raise funds. So a lot of funding goes towards education, community, excess, and so we try to adapt ourselves. We have to be realistic. At one point, we had to raise money for every single exhibition that we do. It's a bit better right now. And then, of course, the pandemic disrupted our entire exhibition and academic schedule. Our conferences, our talks like this one, catalogs just went out of the window, but we're very lucky. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying we came off. There a lot more. There was so much more sort of like suffering during the pandemic, and we're only now trying to get back on track. I'll give you an example of the disruption. So, for example, you may remember that we had exhibitions in seasons because our permanent galleries are cross-cultural. So we had these sort of more geographical seasons. And we had a Southeast Asia season, and then we had a sort of season of Chinese art, and then we had a bit of a Japan. And then we were going to go into an Indian Ocean season where everything, I'm obsessive, compulsive, and a perfectionist. Everything has to be just right. And so that's how you end up being at the museum. And so we planned everything meticulously for years ahead. My colleagues know this. And, we had planned this like Indian Ocean season. It was going to open with the Darwin Tahiliani couture exhibition. And then upstairs, that's happening right now, we were going to have this sort of display on trade textiles. The SG Fashion Now show that year, which happened, was going to be based on drape, the architecture of drape. And then we would end off the season with this amazing show, Body and Spirit, on traditions of wellness across the Indian Ocean. Body and Spirit happened, but just on Southeast Asia in our collection. This was meant to also commemorate 75 years of the Indian Republic in 2021. So you see that there's always a grand plan, but of course that was sort of just tossed out, and it's all coming back in bits and pieces. And so that's why I get questions sometimes, how come you're randomly doing this? But actually, I'm just trying to get ourselves back on track. Our conference schedule also went awry. This was the last international symposium we did online, which was in 2020 on maritime heritage, and then we sort of, we've been sort of a little bit just trying to finish up what we need to do. But I'm happy to say we're going to go back on track next year, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this as well. But then, of course, I think all this time we felt it was important again to sort of hold on to the vision that we had, and I spent a lot of time just articulating what the future is going to look like. When we're done, what we look like, and also consulting, seeking feedback constantly. Also, our two guiding principles are very important in everything that we do. We still look at, port city heritage, innovation, and tradition. It's either or and. Basically, that's always what we're interested in. And then, of course, collaborations are interesting because it forces us to compromise in some way, because we're two different parties with two very different sorts of priorities. And so we've learned also to find ways to find sort of middle grounds for us to be able to work. And it's always been a win-win because we expand our own presence as well outside of the normal space of the museum. And I've said this already, we're setting all of this back on track. So yeah, it's back on track. So the docents will know more about this because I shared our 5-year exhibition schedule with them, but I'm not going to do that today, I'm sorry. I'm going to share just 2 years of our plans for the next 2 years. So again, 2 key points about the exhibitions that ACM do. We believe very strongly in creating our own original exhibitions. So we would never do an exhibition that is taken from somewhere. We believe very strongly in our own intellectual capacity, in our own sort of storylines, and in creating new kinds of exhibitions that would never have been done before. But because of that, every exhibition is always a risk creatively. Would the audience come to this show? Would they accept or understand or be familiar with the histories that we're trying to present? Secondly, and this is more kind of like, how do we deal with our space constraints? We have the largest collection, but we're the third ranking in terms of size for the 4 national museums, national museum galleries. So we don't have enough space, and we want to do much more in terms of the special exhibitions. So previously, we used to do only 1 special exhibition at Peranakan Museum a year that lasts about 8 months. Moving ahead, we're going to try to do 2 a year at Peranakan Museum. One that is more overtly Peranakan, and another that is not Peranakan, but a bit more sort of boutique, specific genres, sort of materials and kinds of ideas that might fit with Peranakan Museum more than at ACM. So ACM, we tend to have more grand, large scale, perhaps a little more kind of geopolitical, conceptual kinds of exhibitions. So you see that a bit in the exhibition schedule for the next 2 years. The next show that's coming on is this show that we've been planning for 5 years. This was a show that I wanted to do when I first started work here in 2016. Manila Galleons. For 200 years, at least, these enormous Spanish treasure ships took the treasures from goods from Asia by way of Manila across the Pacific Ocean to Mexico. So these would have been porcelain, silks, Indian trade textiles, and other kinds of luxury goods from across the entire region to Mexico. And there was a lasting impact in terms of the sort of Hispanic or Latin American material culture because of this exchange. Of course, there were things that came back as well. A large amount of silver came this way on the Manila Galleons, but also other things like chocolate and and chilies and such. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to try to explore the history and the legacy of this trade. I think except in Latin America and in the Philippines, most people have forgotten this very important trade because it really was a kind of, it really sort of like linked up the entire world. It's a kind of globalization before the term was invented, and is the precursor in some ways to today's APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. So we'll have beautiful objects of decorative art made in the Philippines for the Latin American or the Spanish market, or vice versa. We have pieces from Mexico that might have been inspired by Asia. We have pieces coming from museums and collections in the Philippines, Spain, and Mexico. I think also from Japan, if I'm not wrong. And also pieces from our own collection. We're also looking at styles and fashions historically and today. So we have Philippine dress and Mexican dress, and so on and so forth. So opens 16th of November. So please come and see this one. And then the SG Fashion Now exhibition I mentioned, it moves on to Seoul in November. But because we felt it was very important for Singaporean audiences to see the full version, the culmination of 3 years of this, and that creative dynamism, we're bringing it back next year to ACM in June. So next year's SG Fashion Now will be the full sort of Busan show, plus a few more designers that we may have missed out. And then the year after that, we're going to pop up in Paris. And then fascinating collection we've just acquired. We've been so quiet about it because the Chinese actually want this collection, but we got it. So it's a collection of some 81 model pagodas. Some of them are actually 2 meters high. They were based on actual pagodas that stood in China at the time. They were made in Shanghai for the 1915 or 1915 Panama Pacific World Exposition in San Francisco. So very important because it was the first time that Republican China stepped onto the world stage. And so there's a lot of stories you could tell about US-China relations, very relevant to today. And there were also just amazing specimens and records of Chinese architectural heritage. Because 50% of these pagodas are gone. So I think a lot of them were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. So these remain the only accurate records of these pagodas that used to stand in the early 1900s in China. And there's some very famous one like the Lei Feng Ta. How do you translate? The Thunder Wind Pagoda in the Madam White Snake by Sichuan. But it was the old one, not the one that stands today, which has been completely renovated. So you can see this, we're gonna, in the exhibition, we're gonna spotlight Shanghai at the time and San Francisco at the time. This allows us to also talk about diaspora as a subject. And then we're gonna, the visitor will go through and have this sort of grand tour of China by way of these various pagodas that still stand. And it allows us, to also touch on aspects, not just of architecture, but also literature. And again, the craftsmanship involved in making. Accompanying this show will be, we always have a local spotlight. We'll also have a display of local architecture of faith. And then we conclude next year with this very special exhibition spotlighting the work of, I think one of the most important Indian couturiers still living today, Mr. Darun Dahiliani. And it's a tentative sort of like a title, but what I felt, we were so inspired when we first started working with Darun because of his own sort of like how do you explain this? Like, because of how he is so grounded in heritage and art and tradition and craft in everything that he does. In all, every work that he does, we pull out the sort of, the historical architecture, the Mughal architecture or the Peshwai, or the works of art that inspire him. We've had the privilege of taking him around the museum today, as well as our the Heritage Conservation Center yesterday. And again, I'm so moved when we walk through the museum, and I'm learning about my own collection because he's telling us all these like aspects of what the Peshwai is, and these what these objects might have been used for. And so I think that sort of like focus on art and heritage in the creation of works of contemporary design again speaks very strongly to what we believe in innovation in the space of heritage. Of course, Darun himself, what I find fascinating is also he's been subverting these traditions, whether it's in structure, sort of introducing Western tailoring to draping and so on. In these sort of like traditions. So we're going to also explore how he innovates and has sort of subverts a lot of these very traditional ideas of Indian fashion. And lastly, I think one interesting thing that we'll be trying to explore in the show is also the impact of the pandemic on the fashion industry, on communities of craft, and also on how Darun has sort of worked. It's fascinating to me how in the last few years there's also been a kind of rejuvenation, of a turning around of Darun's work. By necessity, I think, because of what the pandemic has forced us to rethink. But it's interesting to me how someone has respected our, a very, I hate to say this, Darun, because you're like a pioneer generation designer, is now today also seen as, the recent Delhi couture exhibition. One of the journalists said that you have to watch out for Darun's pieces because there was this one piece that was full of sexy swagger. So, how does a veteran designer actually sort of innovate and on his own sort of craft? So watch out for this, November 2024. At Peranakan Museum, we'll have our first special exhibition on fuxia. So like I mentioned, this is an example of an exhibition that's not going to be Peranakan per se, but it's a kind of boutique type of show that wouldn't fit in ACM because it's a lot more small scale. Fuxia are embroidered Japanese gift wrapping tea ceremony textiles. They're also used for wrapping gifts. So we have this collection that's coming in from Hong Kong of some 80 very beautiful fuxia. And so we'll also be exploring commonalities in terms of themes, embroidery techniques, and motifs between the Japanese, the Chinese, and the sort of the Peranakan textiles and material culture. I've already seen a lot of. So the fuchsia date from the Edo period through to the Meiji period. So they're just gorgeous. So I'm looking forward to this exhibition at Peranakan Museum. And then we'll end off the year with a more sort of a Peranakan offering, something that we've been wanting to do for some time. Batik Nonias. Two key points. Of course, this was a gift of more than 100 Pekalongan style batiks from 3 generations of batik makers in Java. But I think what is very interesting about the focus of the exhibition curatorial approach is the role of women as entrepreneurs. I think we often forget that a lot of the sort of the batik industry in Java was actually driven by these ateliers that were helmed by women, and so I think again, it's very important to spotlight the role that women played in this particular field. Okay, I've talked too much. Sorry, rambling. Our international symposium series will come back. So we'll have 4 next year. So typically pre-COVID, we had international symposiums and exhibition catalogs for every single exhibition that we do. So actually next year there'll be 5 because I forgot the fuchsia exhibition. Forgot to put it on, Louise. So yeah, 5. And so these are, we'll have one in January in conjunction with Peranakan Museum. And this is going to be a more general symposium on curating the music, like new curatorial perspectives. Manila Galleon in March. June, the Pagoda Odyssey show, and then in September, we'll do a more exploratory kind of symposium because we're going to the space of contemporary design. So we want to get new views and feedback also on how do we approach this question of curating contemporary Asian design. So here again, the goal of our symposium is always to sort of gather local, international academics and experts and curators alongside our own curators to share scholarship and to discuss these issues and new perspectives on our key themes. I mentioned this just now. This was announced in Parliament earlier this year that we're moving into collecting contemporary design. All the national museums are doing so, but we will take our time to announce what we're doing. So for us, it's very specific. Fashion, including textiles and accessories, furniture, including interiors and furnishing, jewelry and craft. And this is basically a straightforward extension of our collection because, most of our collection is basically in this area. And we're just, moving it into the contemporary day. Again, we find this is important because of that innovation and tradition sort of dialogue. Within this context of Asian design, we're also going to spotlight Singapore design. That's also how we got the funding, really, because you have to do some nation building. So our argument was that you've been collecting the artists, the designers and artisans are being forgotten. Who is collecting the designers and the architects and so on? So yes, because of that, we have to spotlight and collect Singaporean designers also very strongly within this context. And of course, for us, we very much focused on design practice and practitioners, treating the designers as artists, looking at practice of craft and so on. And finally, we're doing this in partnership with academia, community, and industry, which we've already done with on the fashion front with LaSalle and so on. So as an example of how things would shift, I think from next year onwards, we're going to collaborate with Design Singapore. So there's going to be a pop-up exhibition. It's actually the returning exhibition from Milan Design Week that Design Singapore does every year. So we're just going to host that in the Contemporary Gallery from September onwards. I see our Director of Finance missing. No, Design Singapore will pay for it. Don't worry. No funding from us, thanks. And in the Contemporary Gallery. And then for 2025, we're going to work on the major special exhibition on Singapore furniture design in partnership with the Singapore Furniture Industries Council. And also, we don't know what the story is going to be yet. We don't know what the narrative is. So I think that's where our conference next year might help us. What are the themes we want to address, and how do we sort of curate a show such as this? In the meantime, however, don't forget to come and see this exhibition, which is the inaugural sort of Singapore design design collection exhibition. Andrew Gan, it's on till September 17th, next weekend. And it's our first ever special exhibition featuring a single Singaporean contemporary designer. He's given us everything. He's going to give us a lot more. And it helps sort of kickstart our archives of contemporary Singaporean designers. And that's all I have, and I'm going to sort of leave you with this and see if you have any questions.